Let's do that hockey.
Welcome to Dobber Prospects Radio. I'm your host, Peter Harling, and coming up on today's episode, I'll be giving you 3 more prospects to watch. I'll be talking about rebuilding my own fantasy team. I made some trades recently, blowing it up, doing a rebuild, traded some stars, and so I don't know, maybe you find that interesting, a little bit of first-hand experience or tip on how to go about maybe starting that on your own. First, I want to say that the podcast is now ranked on Apple Podcasts, so I'm pretty stoked about that. So thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it. And hey, if you want to do something for the show, go ahead and hit a 5-star review, like us, follow us, subscribe, download some episodes, all that fun stuff. It all helps out a lot, and I would really appreciate it. Later on in the show, I'm going to be joined by Dobber Prospects fantasy expert Tony Ferrari. He covers Ottawa Senators for us and draft-eligible prospects. He was one of the 9 or so writing contributors to this year's edition of Dobber Prospects Fantasy Ranking the NHL Draft. So he and I are going to talk about that, break it down by tiers, and look at how some of those players grouped up and who we thought really stands out or was a little high or a little low, so on and so forth. So coming up first, I'd like to talk about 3 prospects you need to know. And the first one is Carter Savoie. He is the brother of Matt Savoie, who applied for but was denied the exceptional status title in the WHL, and he got drafted anyways by the Kootenay Ice. So he's playing in that league now in a limited games played capacity, which is interesting. I'm not sure how that works out exactly. But also his older brother, Carter, is on this week's Player to Watch. So he doesn't exist in Fantrax. So he's not someone you can look up. There is no Fantrax ownership for him. His younger brother does because he's a little bit of a hockey prodigy. But until he's drafted, I guess Carter is not going to be available. So this is someone you're going to want to just kind of maybe look for opportunities to watch him play, which is going to be difficult. He's currently playing in the Alberta Junior Hockey League with the Sherwood Park Crusaders. Difficult to watch those games. And then next year he's committed to University of Denver. And I've mentioned on this podcast a couple of times, it's in Canada specifically, it's difficult to find a lot of NCAA games broadcast on TV. And yeah. So anyhow, the reason why I like this kid is because he's a bit of an offensive dynamo. In 27 games played this season so far, he's got 30 goals, not points, goals. So he's over a goal per game pace. His assist totals are not shockingly low, but disappointingly low. 21 assists only, so 51 points in 27 games is very good. He's 5'9", 192, plays on the left wing. So University of Denver in college is somewhere that he'll have an opportunity to bulk up and learn to play against bigger and older players playing at the college level. Then he'll need a little bit of time playing in pro hockey as well before he is ready to go at the NHL level. But he is someone who is ranked in the top 31 for this coming NHL draft. So Tony and I will talk about him a little bit later on in the episode, so stay tuned for that. But Carter Savoie is the first player. His WHL rights are owned by the Regina Pats, by the way. He was picked in 2017 in the 9th round. I fully don't expect that he'll ever play a game in the WHL, but just throwing that out there, that's who owns his rights in the CHL. So that's player number 1. Second prospect I want to talk about today is Tyce Thompson of Providence College in the NCAA. He is brother to Tage Thompson of the Buffalo Sabres. Tage Thompson is a big, tall, strong first-round pick, played for USA Did a little time in the NCAA himself, and is now competing to play regular in the NHL. So Tyce is not quite the monster that his big brother is. He's 6 foot 165, so he is pretty lean. So he's gonna need to beef up a little bit. But he's playing in the right league to do that. You know, they only play on the weekends in college, so he's got all week to work out in the gym, do some reps. So he is a New Jersey Devils property. He was drafted in 2019, so he was just picked in the 4th round, 96 overall, and he's 20 years old. So he was passed over in the NHL draft 2 times. His sophomore season is what he's playing in right now. We're 17 games in for him. He's got 13 goals and 14 assists for 27 points, which has eclipsed his freshman season point totals of 25 points in 42 games. So this looks like it's a potential case of your classic late bloomer. So a guy who's 20 playing NCAA had a breakout season in his draft after he was drafted by New Jersey. So New Jersey saw something last year in his pretty good season. 25 points in 42 games as a 19-year-old freshman in college is good. But hey, 27 points in 17 games is great. So this is a player who's only 1% Fantrax owned. He's not available in my leagues, of course, unfortunately, but I do this to help you. He's a player that, has serious potential to be a late bloomer, a guy you can add as a free agent in your pool, stash him on your prospect bench, and he might turn pro next year, or he might need another year after that, and then need another season in the AHL. So, we're talking long-term investment here, and I don't think the upside is in an elite player in the NHL, but I do think he has NHL upside, and for a free player, what more could you ask for? So the third player on my 3 prospects to watch list this week is a little bit more probably well-known player. That would be Matthew Phillips of the Calgary Flames, although his Fantrax ownership is only 3%. So Phillips made the list because he's been recalled to the NHL. They call it recalled, but he's never actually played in the NHL, and this is his first time getting a shot in the big league, so I'm not sure why they call it a recall. Anyhow, he's up with the Flames now after posting 25 points in 22 games in the AHL this season. And that's not bad. 9 goals, 16 assists. He had a career year in the 17-18 season in the Dub, playing with Victoria, his final season. He put up 48 points in 71 games. 48 goals in 71 games and 64 points. That's 112 points in 71 games. That's very good. He's undersized, 5'7", 154. So we're talking, Johnny Gaudreau small. But, hey, that's not a problem in the NHL these days, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. Whether or not he can translate his offense to the NHL level remains to be seen, but the fact that he's carried it over from having a very impressive rookie season in the Dub all the way through, constantly progressing and having a career year in his 4th season in the Dub, as I pointed out. And then last year, he had a transition year in the AHL that was okay, and now is a second-year player. He's blooming. So here's a player who I actually have a trade offer on the table for him, and I'm going to consider taking it. I got to pay something to get something, of course, but it's a nice segue to talk about what I wanted to talk about next. So in my league that I'm in, it's exactly like the DPFHL. In fact, I use this league as a model for the DPFHL, and we've talked about that league on this podcast before. So basically what it is there's 24 teams in this league, and it's a hard salary cap. So, if you have a player who's got a long-term contract and not living up, you can't just drop them and add another player. You have to use the same buyout penalties that the NHL has. So it'll go against your salary cap for a few extra years. So it's a full roster, 3 centers, 3 left wings, 3 other wings, and then 3 forwards, 60 and 2 goalies at 4. Bench players, you can have any position that you like to alternate in between your roster as you set your rosters daily for a head-to-head match. And then you also have a 25 or so man prospect bench. So it's like 50 contracts. It's a full team. So I inherited this team coming back into this league this year after a little hiatus, and the team was okay, right? It is good. The goaltending isn't very good, though. The goalies are Corey Crawford and Cam Talbot, and goaltending takes up a lot of your head-to-head categories each week. So if you don't win your goaltending categories consistently, you're going to lose consistently. And that's sort of been my problem. Crawford's been coming around a little bit lately. I have had Brad Marchand. He was my best player by far. And I acquired Pajot and Borowiecki from Ottawa for a second, third round pick earlier in the season. Pajot's been paying off in spades. But, he's going to get a raise this season as a free agent. So will Borowiecki. So their value will go down a little bit as player value is hand in hand with salary cap and their contract. So if they have an expiring contract, their value goes up because when their contract expires, if you don't like the contract they sign as a free agent, you can just drop them. So it's a good way to get rid of contracts. You let them expire, and then you just kind of walk away from them and become free agents. So anyways, as I was saying, this season's kind of gotten away from me. The teams hasn't been able to put together a win streak, put together a few loss streaks, lost to some teams that I didn't feel I had any business losing to. And so I decided, you know what? I'm gonna mix it up. I'm gonna do a rebuild. It's fun. There's no money in these pools, so why the hell not? Problem with that is I was really thin on draft picks. I don't have my own first round pick. So that was a real problem for me. So if you're going to blow up your roster and trade all your good players away for futures, it's nice to have the reward of after weeks and weeks and weeks of losing all season, when the draft comes around, you get rewarded with, a lottery ticket and then hopefully a shot at Byfield or Lafreniere. So getting my draft pick back was part of my strategy. The team that owned it was very interested in Brad Marchand, who I decided I would part ways with. He's one of the best players in the NHL, on the best line in the NHL, and one of the best contracts in the NHL. So he's one of the best players in the pool. So if you're gonna, make a move to start a rebuild, that's a good way to do it, by trading a player like that who's at the pinnacle of his career and very quickly is going to start, in a year or two, he's going to start diminishing slowly but surely. So trade him while he's at the top. If you don't have an opportunity to win, why not, right? So here's what I did. The first trade I made as part of my rebuild was I packaged up Shea Weber and Mark Borowiecki. So the reason why I traded Shea Weber is because his contract is really high and it runs for a really long time and he's really old. He's one of the best defensemen in the league, of course. He's a multi-cat monster. He provided me with a lot of shots and hits and blocks and points. So pretty much everything but face-off wins Weber was giving me, and plenty of them. So I really liked the production that he gave me, but the problem is, like I said, 2-3 years from now, if he doesn't retire, that's going to be a major problem. And I wasn't really interested in the last couple of years before he retired of him just going through the motions. So I packaged those guys up and I moved them out for cap freedom. And the players I got back were Tyce Barrie, Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman, and I think with the coaching change that's going to be a new lease on life for him. And while he may not provide nearly the same sort of value that I was getting from Weber and Borowiecki in terms of hits and blocks, I still think I'll get good value out of him offensively. And if I'm right and he's able to rebound in Toronto this season under a new coach, getting a lot more power play time and put up some offensive numbers at a decent salary cap hit of $5.5 million. I might even be able to flip him because I probably won't keep him once he signs for $7 or $8 million next year if he has a big second half of the season. I'll be able to, trade him as a rental at the end of the season as well and recoup some more assets for him, hopefully. The other player I got was Jimmy Vesey. He was kind of a cap dump to keep the cap sort of similar. More on him in a bit. And I got a fourth round pick in the draft too. The next trade I made was Jimmy Vesey. I flipped him immediately to another team for Mike Hoffman. I'm not sure why they were so keen to get rid of Mike Hoffman. He's an unrestricted free agent after this season, but so is Vesey. So no long-term commitment with either players, but I just feel like the upside with Hoffman is a lot higher, and he's producing significantly more than Vesey is right now. He makes a few more million, so I guess it was cap relief for the other team. But I was happy to take that player off his hands. I feel like that was a bit of a steal. Now the big trade. I traded the package of Brad Marchand with J.G. Pajot and Nick Paul, who I signed as a free agent before the season started because I knew that he was waiver exempt, and I didn't think that the Sens would want to put him through waivers and send him to the AHL. But they did, and he started the season there for a very brief time. They recalled him, and I don't think he's going back to the AHL for a while. He's in the NHL to stay, which is great because I really like him. I've been a fan of his since he was in junior, playing for Canada at the World Juniors. I think there's some upside there. Pajot is not too old or too long on the tooth, but again, I mentioned he's an unrestricted free agent after this summer, and his contract is going to take a bit of a bump. And I also don't think he's nearly as good as he's been producing so far this season. League leading plus minus, playing for the Ottawa Senators. That does not sound sustainable. And he's got like 18 goals or something outrageous like that. Like, that's obviously not sustainable. He has no history of providing that in his NHL career so far. So sell high. And here's what I got back. I got back Riley Smith, Matthias Ekholm, and that mainly balanced the salaries in the trade. Although I was happy to get back Riley Smith. I think he's very similar in value to Mike Hoffman, a good, moderately priced offensive forward. Doesn't provide me with a lot of the peripheral stats that I was getting from some of the other guys that I've traded. But however, he does put up power play points and whatnot. Matthias Ekholm, I think, is one of the more valuable players dollar-wise in the NHL. His $3 and change million contract, and he's got, I think, 2 more years to go on that. So that's pretty sweet deal. He gives you a little bit of everything, a jack of all trades, master of none. A few hits, a few blocks, a few points, a few power play, a few shorthanded here, there, and everywhere. He's all over the place, and his plus minus isn't bad either. So I didn't mind picking him up at all. Troy Brouwer was a dump, just a roster filler for the guy. Didn't have space for him on his roster anymore, and he's not minors eligible, being 1,000 years old. So that was part of the condition that I had to take that player. Eetu Tolola is another player I got in this trade, a prospect. I'm a really big fan of this kid. This is just me being a fanboy getting this player in this trade. I don't know if he has a lot of NHL upside or not, but I really like the way this kid plays. I like watching him. I was really impressed with watching him at World Juniors and in the Dub a few years ago when he was here. I watched him play at a Calgary Flames prospect camp, and he's very rambunctious. He's hitting people, he's shooting, he's involved after the play between the whistles, getting guys' feathers all ruffled up. I really like him. I think he's a really fun player to cheer for. So I hope he makes it. And then I also got 3 first-round picks, all about in the middle of the draft. And as I mentioned earlier, part of the condition of me wanting to do this rebuild was the fact that I wanted to make sure that I got my own first-round pick. So none of the picks I got were mine. All our teams are NHL team names. We don't have fun team names like the Springfield Isotopes or anything like that. So I got the Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Montreal first-round pick. And then I had already had an arrangement where I would trade the Winnipeg first-round pick and the Chicago's 4th-round pick for my first-round pick and Chicago's 5th-round pick. So a swap of first-round picks and Chicago 4th and 5th. So the guy I traded with who gave me my own first-round pick back moved from the 5th round to the 4th round with the Chicago picks and rolled the dice on the Winnipeg-Calgary flip. We're a couple of points apart. I'm actually lower in the standings, or higher in the standings than Winnipeg is. So he, as of right now, he won that as well. But he's working on the assumption that after having traded away Marchand and Weber and Borowiecki and Pajot, that my team's probably not gonna get any better before it gets worse this season. So those are the moves that I made on my fantasy team. Hey, I'd love to hear your feedback on them. If you think I won or lost or made fair trades in any of these situations, you can reach me on Twitter at PHARLING, at Farling, or at DPR_show. Speaking of DPR show, it came to my attention recently that the podcast is now ranked in the top 50 for hockey podcasts on Apple Podcasts. So that's amazing. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate that. If you haven't already done so, I would really appreciate it if you could, on whatever podcast host you're listening to on this show, be it Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Apple, wherever we are. If you wouldn't mind just, giving the show a review, a 5-star review, maybe a comment, or on Podbean, wherever you listen. If you're on Twitter, if you wouldn't mind, retweeting the episode once it's posted, anything along those lines to help increase some traction on the show would be much obliged. Gratitude. Okay, so 3 players to watch: Carter Savoie, Tyce, Thompson, Matt Phillips. A little bit of history on my fantasy team and my rebuild and the trades that I just made recently. I hope you found that interesting. If you're still with me, thanks very much. Now let's move on. Let's talk about the NHL entry draft and how we do the fantasy rankings. And I'm going to be joined by my guest, Tony Ferrari. So hang on for that. All right, welcome back to the DPR show. And now let's do a little bit of that hockey talk. We'll do some fantasy draft ranking conversation. And I'm pleased to be joined by my guest right now, Mr. Tony Ferrari. That's a sporty car last name you got there, bud.
Yeah, it is. I get the comment a lot, so I'm used to that one.
Right on. So, Tony, you write for us for DobberProspects. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the team you cover and where else you write for?
Yeah, well, I cover the Senators. Pretty good prospect pool. I've enjoyed doing that this year after covering Minnesota last year, which wasn't as exciting. So, yeah. So I enjoyed the move over to the Senators when that came up. I definitely jumped on that. And I also do some work for FC Hockey. But, yeah, most of my stuff's at Dobber, and I do a weekly column every Wednesday, and every couple weeks I do a shift-by-shift analysis. I call shift work, and different draft-eligible players there, and I go over a full game of their shifts and kind of pick out some of the finer details of their game within that. So
those are really great articles, by the way. I really enjoy reading those. They are extremely insightful. It paints a really nice picture of what that player's all about.
Yeah, they're fun to do, but they're long. That's the big thing. Like they go out on Monday mornings, and I'm like, you gotta sit down, have a coffee, like read it over your lunch break, something like that, because it's a lot of video and a lot of comments. So I try to condense it down as much as possible and leave out shifts that the player comes on for 15 seconds and does nothing. So I try to condense it down, but it's always a long one.
I bet it is a lot of work. Labor of love, no doubt.
Sure.
What's your Twitter handle? Where can people find you?
The Twitter handle is at the Tony Ferrari. It's pretty simple. Someone took Tony Ferrari, so I added that to the front of it, and that's where you can find me at.
All right. So, Tony, you were gracious enough to be one of the 9 contributing writers for the fantasy ranking, the NHL entry draft for the season. This is something that I started a few years ago. It gets a lot of clicks, a lot of love on the site. I think it's one of the only places, if not the only place that I know of that does this. Everyone and their monkey does a draft ranking, but no one does a fantasy draft ranking. So you can, and I highly recommend doing your fantasy draft research by looking at all of the other rankings, going around, seeing what people say before the draft, then seeing how the chips fall at the draft, because no one does more scouting than NHL scouts. So
Sure.
they certainly know their stuff. So if they're drafting players early, there's a reason why. But what you want to know is the reason why relevant to fantasy hockey? Is this a player that's going to come in and is going to be able to contribute? What's the ETA on their arrival? What's their upside? What's the likelihood, and all that stuff? So just simply using the NHL draft results as your draft guide can be perilous. You might end up with a Logan Stanley on your roster and be scratching your head as to why you're not winning your pool. So the fantasy draft ranking that we do, just for anyone who hasn't read it yet, you can find it on Dauber Prospects. I will link it in the show notes, of course. You can find it by going to Dauber Prospects and clicking on the 2020 draft page. So what I do is I solicit the services of a number of writers at Dauber Prospects who focus on the entry draft. So for purposes of this article, I asked yourself and our director of European scouting, Joki Nevalainen, Cam Robinson, of course, contributed. And I also look outside of the Dauber Prospects organization and get some prominent writers, scout people to help contribute as well. So Scott Wheeler from The Athletic, Ryan Wegman, prospect manager for McKean's, Brock Otten from the OHL Prospects blog, Steve Ellis from the Hockey News, and Russ Cohen, Sportsology, prospect radio host. These are all the people that contributed. And the way I come up with the list is everyone submits me a list, but it's a consensus ranking. So it's an average sort of thing. And then everyone gives me a couple of blurbs on each player, and I put in a copy and paste some of the a different sampling so everyone gets a little bit of exposure on the article. And what's interesting when this is done is how it all breaks out into some tiers. The way I do the ranking is, like, for example, every single writer, all 9 of them, ranked Alexis Lafreniere number 1. So he had a score of 9. Almost everybody ranked Quinton Byfield number 2, and his final score ended up being 19. One person ranked him 3. So you can see how it goes. Wherever you're ranked on that person, that's your point, and then your total points determines your overall ranking. So once I have the overall rankings, then I sort it all out at 1 through 31, and it shows me some different tiers as well. So this is a really interesting process to go through. Really good in my own fantasy draft prep, by the way. So, and having realized that and thought of that, I thought, you know what? Why don't I get one of the writers on? Thanks, Tony. And and we'll go through this and kind of not player by player, but tier by tier, kind of break it down and let everyone see how it all shakes out. Now, remember, this episode is being recorded on December 12th. So the World Juniors might have an impact on some of these, and of course the rest of the season and playoffs and Memorial Cup and et cetera, et cetera. U18s will have a major impact on this too. However, we work with what we know today. So let's get to it. Why don't we start at the top and work our way down, right?
Sounds good.
Right on. All right. So without further ado, Alexis Lafreniere, ranked number 1. He is in a tier with Quinton Byfield and no one else. Those guys were the consensus top 2, and not a lot of difference between them. So their rankings were 9 and 19, and this should surprise absolutely nobody.
No, honestly, I figured these 2 would be at the top, and I had a feeling someone would push Byfield up to number 1, and I almost did it myself even, because I almost feel like at this point Byfield might have the highest ceiling of anybody in this draft with his size, speed, the skills the puck skills he has. It's literally the sky is the limit for this kid. Lafreniere is going to be good. He's going to be a first liner. We know that already. But Byfield has that potential to pass him possibly at the pro level. But as of right now, Lafreniere is just running away with it. It's undeniable with the points he's putting up, the way he's playing. He's just dominating every level he's played at. So it's not a shocker that he was number 1.
No, another before we go too far, another little nugget that I neglected to mention that this is a points only fantasy ranking for keeper leagues. So not all these are
Yes.
all draft entry players. So only a few of them will actually have impact on your fantasy roster next year. You're looking long term with all these guys, and it doesn't worry about bangers and mash, keeping Carlson type of
Yeah.
leagues. It's just points only. So if you were to look at like a DPFHL or UHL, like the season or league that I was just talking about in the segment before, um, Quentin Byfield would actually be someone who I would probably rank higher because I think he's going to provide a lot more peripheral sort of stats than Lafreniere, including faceoffs, which is a big one. That's an entire stat category that he'll be contributing to that Lafreniere won't because he's a winger.
Yeah. That's the big thing with Byfield too, right? Like you said, if it's a bangers and mash league, he's gonna be the guy that's putting up bigger points because he's gonna get a lot more hit total. He's gonna have a higher hit total. Like I said, the faceoffs are huge with him. The fact that he's a center is kind of what moves him ahead in that league. But if we're going points only at this point, I think Lafreniere is just squeaking ahead right now.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so that's the top tier, and coming in a second tier, all on his own, with 26 points, is Lucas Raymond. Again, no surprise there that I think that he ranked third overall. I was a little bit surprised that there was enough separation between him and any of the other tiers, though, that he would be that established as number 3. I mean, a lot of people say that's where the draft starts at number 3 because Lafreniere and Byfield, they're going to be 1-2 or 2-1, whichever way you slice it. But then, I've seen a number of other rankings where other people are ranked number 3. But because it's just fantasy, does he have that fantasy upside that's better than everyone else, do you think?
I think that's what it is. It's the fact that it's strictly fantasy. We're going points only. Raymond's got such a dynamic skill set with between his skating and his shot's so underrated, and the playmaking is just it's something to marvel at. Like his creativity with the puck is just it's otherworldly. He might be the most creative player in this draft, and as much as a lot of people are starting to rank people ahead of him in that third spot for a lot of their draft rankings, I think at this point Raymond's getting punished by the fact that he's not playing essentially in the SHL right now, and he's kind of getting screwed over a little bit by that. But he's playing in a pro league. Holtz is getting more minutes and stuff, so he's putting up more stats. But Raymond's skill set, it's something special. At the start of the year, he was in the same, at least in my opinion, he was in the same tier as Byfield. Byfield's pulled away a bit, and Raymond's kind of, in my opinion, he still separates himself from the next group. That includes Holtz and Stutzel, Perfetti, and those guys.
I'm predicting a strong recency bias at the end of the season when he blows it up at the U18.
Exactly.
And he just locks down that third in everybody's draft rankings going into the draft out of the home stretch.
Exactly. And that's what I've been telling people is wait till the U18s. Wait till the World Juniors. Wait till the U18s. See him against competition that's not men in a pro league where he's not being prioritized and his development's not a priority for Lunda, right? It's a pro league. They're there to win. So he's in a tough spot, but we'll see.
It's hard for a lot of people to really get a good handle on prospects because they don't watch them. Not because they don't want to. It's not enough time in the day. And, if you live in Canada, it's hard to watch SHL or KHL games. Or, if you live in the States, it's hard to watch Alberta Junior Hockey League games and so on and so forth. So you look at the stat line and you think, he's not even half a point a game. Like
exactly.
Not impressed. But, you take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, he's got less than half a point a game, but he's playing 4 minutes a night, every other night. Like exactly. He's not even in every game. So, anyways, we'll see. So moving along. So that's a second tier all on his own, Lucas Raymond. The third tier has 6 players in it. So coming in at number 4 is Alexander Holtz. He has 46 points. And this tier goes to number 9, which has 83 points. And then the next jump after that goes from 80 to 115 in the next tier. So in this little group of 6 players, it goes Alexander Holtz, Cole Perfetti, Tim Stutzel, Jamie Drysdale, Marco Rossi, and Anton Lundell. The next highest ranked guy you had was Stützle on your list. You had him 4th. He comes in 6th here. Why did you have Stützle so high?
I have Stützle so high because he might be my favorite player in the draft. He's my adopted son this year. He's the guy that I've been pumping his tires all year. He's, in my opinion, behind Lucas Raymond, he's the most dynamic player in this draft. His skating is on another level, and is in a purely fantasy perspective, this kid's just gonna put up points. He's gonna get assists. He's creative with the puck. He's a great playmaker, and he's got a lethal shot. Like his shot from, like, he gets into the slot with regularity, and he's just firing it over goalies' shoulders. And he's doing it in Champions League. He's doing it in the DEL. And he's showing that, like, the DEL is becoming more of a developmental league, and it's not as putrid as what people try to make it seem at times.
Yeah, the Germans are coming. They're putting out solid players, first round picks year after year these days. I had Marco Rossi, but I mean, if taking Jamie Drysdale out because he's a defenseman, you've got Holtz, Perfetti, Stützle, Rossi, Lundell. I think that is a very fluid group that you'll see a wide variety of people ranking them based on preferences and biases. I think that could change dramatically, but I don't see them moving too far or having anyone else really jump into this group. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure.
You can slice them up any way you want.
Yeah, exactly. I think Lundell gets, in a fantasy perspective, he gets docked a little bit because he does have the reputation of being a more defensive player, but he has that elite skill set. Marco Rossi's been destroying worlds lately. Like, he's putting up points that he's outpacing Byfield even in the OHL in a points per game perspective. He's destroying things right now. And I mean, goal Perfetti, he's become a bit more of a playmaker this year to start the year, especially with a low shooting percentage to start the year. But he's still producing. Like, you can't hate on him. If anything, you have to almost look at his versatility as a plus for him, right? Like, he was billed going into the year as a goal scorer, and the guy that's he could put up 50 goals in his draft year. Well, he's not doing that right now, but he's starting to pick the goal scoring back up. But his assist numbers are just through the roof. At the time of when we were writing the blurbs for everyone, he was leading the OHL in assists, not even just draft eligibles, the league itself. So,
right, yeah, and he had that monster Hlinka at the start of the season to really give him some traction in his draft year. So, did he just get cut from Canada today?
Yeah, he got cut just recently.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I seen it coming, kind of. They had him playing as the 13th forward in both the games they played in the last couple of days. So it was the writing was on the wall, but it was good exposure to get him in the camp. And yeah,
he's got 2 more years of eligibility, doesn't he?
Yep, he's got 2 more years, so he'll be on the team next year most likely.
It
was always his year next year.
All right, so that's a solid group. One defenseman making the top 10, and that's Jamie Drysdale. What are your thoughts on drafting defensemen in fantasy hockey? Do they lose or gain value because there's so few of them, but you only get so many points from defensemen?
I am of the mindset that if you can get a high scoring defenseman, get him. Like, on my team this year, it's a keeper league. It's points only, plus there's, like, we count Corsi and a few other really weird little stats in our league. But I have two of my top defensemen are Cale Makar and John Carlson this year. And, like, go for the high scoring defenseman. Yeah, exactly. If you can get the high scoring defenseman, go for him. What's that?
Where are you in the standings?
Oh, I'm first. I was undefeated until last week when I went on vacation, and I didn't have the Wi-Fi to set my lineups every day, and I was so stressed out. And then when I finally got on Thursday, I was still up, but I ended up losing just barely. But it was actually just Stephen Ellis who contributed to this article too. So.
Oh, you see, I don't have anyone in my fantasy leagues contributing this article, so there's no conflict of interest there for me. Yeah, but that's pretty cool that you can, you can back that up though. That theory, go with the offensive defenseman and be in first. Okay, so moving on. The next group's got 5 guys in it, and it's Connor Zary, Dylan Holloway, Noel Gunler, Hendrix Lapierre, and Yaroslav Askarov. So the point range here is 115 to 130. So that's a pretty tight group. 15 points separating all those guys, 5 guys. Connor Zary was leading the dub in scoring. Dylan Holloway is a freshman in the NCAA. The interesting player out of all this group, though, that I'm really curious about is the goalie, Yaroslav Askarov. U17s last year, I watched that on TV, and Craig Button was like just falling over himself how much he was in love with this guy. There's lots of Twitter love for him as well. I like what I see. I think he might be the best goaltending prospect to come along in a decade. And I would rank him. I took some heat on Twitter the other day because someone was asking who they would pick somewhere in the draft, like at 3 or 4 or whatever. And I said, don't forget about Askarov. And people are like, you don't pick goalies in the first round, dumbass, and so on and so forth. But I'm like, yeah, you do. When they're Yaroslav Askarov.
Yeah, I was just gonna say when they're Yaroslav Askarov, you definitely draft him early in the first round. Now he's been a guy that all year I've had in my personal like draft rankings. He's been like in that 9 to 11 range. But every time someone asks me about him, I'm like, he could go third. Like I have zero doubt that if like Detroit's up there at third or whatever, and Byfield and Lafreniere are gone, they could easily just go, you know what, let's draft the goalie, fill that organizational hole, and we don't have to worry about goalies for the next 15 years. Like, Askarov's that good that he, in my opinion, he warrants a top 5 pick, if not a top 10. And I don't know. He's a guy that in fantasy, it's almost a guarantee. You draft him and then you wait a couple of years and then he's going to be your starting goalie. He's going to be the best goalie on your team. So, yeah,
I mean, I've heard people's argument with why you don't pick goalies because they're voodoo and you just, you never know. It's really difficult to predict the way their career is going to pan out. And they cite players that were picked really, really high that bust out. And I'm like, yeah, well, what about Alexander Dag?
Yeah, exactly, right. Like,
or Nail Yakupov. There's no guarantee with any player.
Yeah, there's going to be busts all over the draft regardless of position. And honestly, I think the problem with goalies is no one knows how to evaluate them. They're like, you almost have to play goalie to know how to evaluate the goalies. Like, this is going to be a shameless plug, but when I was talking to Mike McKenna, the former NHL goalie, I did an interview for Dobber Prospects with him, and I asked him about the whole goalies are voodoo thing, and he completely called BS on that. He's like, it's not that goalies are voodoo, it's that no goalies scout after their careers are done. Teams need to get goalies involved in scouting, and they need to get the goalies involved in looking at these young players and deciding whether or not they're going to pan out. And he was telling me about some of the finer details of it and everything, and it's hard to evaluate goalies because, like you said, there's one goalie and there's 6 skaters, or 5 skaters. So what position are you more likely to have played or more likely to have watched with more frequency? Like, you don't play goalie, so it's hard to evaluate them.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with his point. However, goalies absolutely are voodoo to me because I don't pretend to understand the position.
Exactly.
I think they're crazy for playing it. All right, so that's that group. Anyone else in there that you want to talk about? Holloway, maybe?
Holloway's a tough one to evaluate because he plays in the NCAA. He plays college hockey. So a lot of people don't watch him because, especially in Canada, because you don't get college hockey on TV here very often. And when you do, it's Boston College. It's usually out east. And so you don't get much Wisconsin on TV. And so you have to search it out. And most people don't search it out. And even in the States, it's not on television like college football is. So him being there, it's almost like he's the forgotten prospect. But he showed up at the Team Canada camp. Even though he was cut, he was one of the best players at the camp, and he's going to be on that team next year. It's similar to Perfetti, where next year was kind of always their year, but they had a chance this year too.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I commented on him in the article, that, he's come from the AJHL to the NCAA. So, less than 1% of the population of the hockey community has actually seen this kid ever play a game.
Exactly.
So he's way under the radar. Right on. So the next group, Dun, dun, dun. Ooh, that would be about 3 players. So Rodion Amirov, Zion Nybak, and Yan Misek make up the next group, and their rankings go from 150 to 179. So the gaps start to get a little bit more wild here, as the rankings outside of the top 15 were very inconsistent, and that's pretty standard for all of these articles that I've done. I mean, you've got guys now that'll be in the top 15 here, that weren't ranked on a couple of the other writers' lists at all. And before I go too far, side note on Askarov, that's why he's ranked so low on this list, not because it's a fantasy ranking, just because he was omitted on a lot of people's lists. They didn't think about the goalie. I forgot to really specify when I handed out the instructions for this that, please include Yaroslav Askarov and any other goalies in your list. So some people just didn't mention him at all. Other people had him ranked as high as 8. I think I had him at 8. Anyway, so that's why he should be higher on this list.
Yeah.
In my opinion. I think that's a mistake. So the next group, these 3, Amirov, Nybek, and Misek. What do you? Who stands out in this group for you?
I think Misek stands out in this group for me, and it's again much like the Holloway debate. He plays in the Czech league. He's not on everyone's TV. Like, the only people that really watch him, and I mean all 3 of these guys really, they play in kind of obscure leagues, at least on this side of the ocean, because you got Amirov playing in the KHL, Nybek playing in the Super Elite, and Misek playing in the Czech League, which is even more obscure than those 2. And so it's you only really see Misek if you search him out, or if you hope he's playing at World Juniors or under 18 tournaments and stuff. So he was pretty good at the Hlinka. He was one of the standouts for the Czechs, and yeah, he's a good player, but it's hard to find views on him.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna lie. I've never had a chance to see him play, so looking forward to getting some. Did he make the World Junior team?
I don't know off by hand, actually.
I'd think so.
I would assume so. He's got the skill for it, for sure. And the Czechs don't have an extremely strong roster this year, so being the host nation, bringing the flashy kid, makes sense.
Yeah, so hopefully he's at the World Juniors and I get a chance to watch him play like in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
All right. The next group is another group of 3. And so we go from Misek 179 points, Jeremy Poirier 192, Dawson Mercer 200, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Casper Simon Tivel.
That's what I've been going with. Simon Simone Tavel.
Yeah,
I've heard it all. So
that guy.
We'll just go with Casper.
Sure. Yeah. Casper the Friendly Simon. He comes in at 203 points. So I like Dawson Mercer out of this group. I watched him play in the Canada-Russia series, and man, this kid's got a wicked good shot. He's smart. He knows how to get into really good scoring positions. But I actually had a chance today to watch on my phone the World Junior exhibition game against Canadian University team sport, and a few things that I really didn't like that I saw today.
He's
got some warts in his game. He was they had the puck in U Sports zone, and he was kind of doing the big circle, and he was going along the blue line, and I saw it coming. I was like, oh man, you're gonna lose it, and the guy poked it and breakaway goal. Yeah, and I was just like, oh man, you can't make plays like that at higher levels, dude. Without support, you gotta be real sure. So anyways, that's just my thought on him. Who stands out at you between these 3?
I'll take Poirier right now, because he was a guy I had ranked a lot higher than 18. I think I had him at 11, if I'm not mistaken, when I submitted my list. And he's just a guy that he oozes offensive potential. In my opinion, he's this year's Thomas Harley out of the QMJHL, though. And he's just an offensive guy. He just goes. He's a guy that's going to give up some defensive lapses. He's gonna make mistakes in that end, but with the puck on his stick, it's just he's on another level. He's almost Jamie Drysdale level that way, but he doesn't have the defensive game. But in a fantasy league, you're going for points. You don't care how many goals, unless you're counting plus minus or goal differential in some way. But you go for the points. He's going to get you assists. He's going to play on the power play most likely. He's a big guy that's going to quarterback a power play at the NHL level most likely.
Yeah, my takeaway with this guy is his best asset and his weakness are the same thing, and it's his desire to carry the puck, right? And he can skate it with authority and look great and make plays happen. And then at the same time, he can skate himself out of position really badly, create a turnover that leads to a chance the other way. But here's the good thing. That's coachable.
Exactly.
And you can fix that with experience. Experience and coaching can iron that out of your game. What you can't teach is the creativity and the confidence. So if he can maintain his offensive creativity and confidence and desire to carry the puck and make plays happen and just be a little bit smarter about it at times, that bodes well for him.
Yeah, I have the article up here, and I think it was Will Scouch. He says his decisions and give a shit meter need to shift, and I think that's the biggest thing when you're talking real hockey. You need him to care a little bit more about what happens with the puck, but I mean he's gonna put on a show with the puck on his stick as long as he calms down a little bit with trying to do everything himself.
Right. Okay. So Casper at 203 points. The next kind of group is it's kind of big. It goes from Antonio Stranges at 212 to Tyce at 251. Pretty much the rest of the grouping here. There isn't really a big jump. So Stranges is 212, Emile Andre is 217, Maverick Bourque 225, Jacob Perreault 235, Justin Barron 238, Jaromir Pitlick, great hockey name. Jaromir Pitlick 243, Tyson Forster 244, Cormier 247, Ronnie Horovnin 248. Like really incremental jumps all the way down the rest of the way to Tyce Similek at 251. And actually, sorry, who made 31?
Carter Savoie.
Carter Savoie, yeah. Why didn't I write that down? Yeah, so, I mean, there's a logjam there. And then the guys that were just outside the list that made the honorable mentions as well, they were all right there, too. And there's a couple other guys that were right in that wheelhouse as well that just didn't have a write-up, so I didn't even mention them in the honorable mentions. So who's one or two players in there that you feel really strongly about?
One of the guys that I don't feel as strongly about having this high is Justin Barron at 25. In a real world perspective, I'd put him in that range, but in a fantasy perspective, I'm not completely sold on his offensive potential. I think he'll be a decent two-way guy. He's, in my opinion, he tops out at like a 25, 30 point guy. But if we're going fantasy points, fantasy perspective, sorry, you want a guy that has a little bit more of an offensive upside. He's got a big shot and he's mobile to an extent, but he's not dynamic in any way. I don't think his playmaking is elite. It's good, but it's more of a PP2 guy. And at this point in a prospect fantasy draft, you're kind of going for guys that have a little bit more offensive potential, like Jeremy Poirier or even a guy like Lucas Cormier, who's down at 28. Right.
One of the players I was interested in seeing where they sorted out in all this was Antonio Stranges. London Knights forward, has that really great unorthodox skating style, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. And that's the I think it's the 10-2 or the Mohawk, where basically you put your heels together so that you can face and see the play. Jeremy Bracco does this really well. He's the first player I've ever seen that really uses this on a regular basis. Bracco uses it on the power play, and he's extremely efficient at it. He'll get the puck on the half wall, and he'll skate behind the net. And when he comes out from behind the net, he puts his heels together and keeps taking strides with his feet pointing in opposite directions. and it allows him to put his back to the boards and face without having to turn and look right out and see the whole sheet of ice, see everybody and where they are, and he's still able to move and stride. And then he'll go out to the blue line and just keep on going if he doesn't like what he sees until something opens up. It's a really effective but very complicated way to skate. And Tony Stranges does this a lot too. So there's a lot of but with Antonio Stranges. Like, you can watch the highlight reels and you'll see some good stuff, and he's very offensive, but a lot of people have that but.
Exactly.
So
he's
what's the but for you?
Yeah, for me the but is his lack of desire to play without the puck, essentially. In the offensive zone, he's moving. He's all over the place. He's even when the puck's not on his stick, he's trying to get into a better position to score. But without the puck, he's kind of like in the neutral zone, defensive zone. He's a little lackadaisical. He floats around a bit. It seems like he knows where to be. He just doesn't care to be there at times. But for a fantasy perspective, he's a guy that, like you said, the 10-2, people fear it because of, they're like, oh, well, Jeremy Bracco uses it, and he hasn't made it to the NHL level, and his offensive game is predicated on it, and he can't quite get to the next level with it. But I think Stranges has just a superior offensive tool set to Bracco in general, and he combines that with the 10-2. I think his vision's outstanding, much like Bracco, but he's also got the goal scoring threat, which Bracco doesn't have. He's got a really high end shot, and he gets his goal totals muted a bit in London because he doesn't get the opportunity like a lot of junior teams do, because London's a factory that just continuously produces warriors and guys that just put up big numbers at the junior level. So he just doesn't get the opportunity, I think. And I think he's going to be a guy like Connor McMichael last year, where people are a little sour on him, but the London Knights factor will come in next year and he's going to tear up the league before we all know it.
It's, I want to see some more. I haven't seen him play enough yet to really have a super strong opinion, but let's just say my curiosity is really piqued.
Oh, for sure.
On his file and what his upside can be. One last player I wanted to get your thoughts on was the 31st ranked guy, Carter Savoie. How do you pronounce his last name? Savoie?
Savoie? Maybe.
Anyway,
I've gone with
probably Savoie. I mean, he's
Savoie,
coming from Western Canada, so it's probably not Savoie.
Yeah, that's why I've always gone with Savoie. I'm like, he's not from Quebec. He's Savoie. He's good.
Right. Okay, so I talked about him. He's one of my 3 prospects to watch that I talked about at the beginning of the podcast. Coming out of the AJHL, so we talked about how that is a little seen league, but hey, Kel McCarr came from there and he's working out just fine.
Yeah, he's pretty all right.
Yeah, and his brother Matt Savoie, is the player that most people would be more familiar with. He had the exceptional status application for the Dub as the first player, didn't get it. But still a bit of a hockey prodigy and someone who we're all going to be paying close attention to for his draft.
Yeah, he got that like quasi acceptance where they rejected it, but they've given him a special status now where he's allowed to play somewhere between 30 and 50 games. No one quite seems sure, but it's a weird situation. But he's playing in the WHL most of the time. Yeah.
That's. I'm sure they'll find a way to exercise options to get him into the maximum, or even other circumstances, emergency injury recalls, or
exactly.
Peyton Krebs is at the World Juniors, so we need him, kind of thing.
Exactly.
So he's in the Dub, but his older brother Carter is playing in the AJHL, and he's a commit for what did I read? I think it was Denver.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to see a lot of him play so far?
He's a guy that I went out and I searched out to watch him play a little bit more. I've watched a few of his games with the Sherwood Park in the AJHL, and then I watched him at the Canadian or the World Junior A Championships a month and a half ago, and he was pretty good there as well. And then there was the Junior A Challenge last week, and he just or it's going on still actually, and he just hasn't quite been good. He scored a shootout goal yesterday, but the game itself, he was a little invisible. He hasn't really taken the step that I was hoping I'd see him take on an international stage, and it's been a little depressing. But I try not to put too much clout into one tournament because he's been so good with Sherwood Park and he's been good at other events, so I'm not hating on him too much for it.
All right. Did we miss any players that you specifically want to talk about?
Let's see. Who else is there? A guy that didn't make the cut, actually, that I kind of like is Thomas Bordelot. He's, in my opinion, he's the top American. Him and Smolanek, they've been kind of 1 and 2 for the Americans this year, and a bit of a weaker class for them after last year's all-world class. That was insane. But no, Bordelot's, in my opinion, he has the highest upside, but he's also got a bit of a bust factor. He's a smaller guy, but he's got a load of talent. Every time you watch the U.S. NDP team, he's the guy that always sticks out to me. I've been to a few of the games live, and he's always finding the score sheet with a goal or 2 assists, or he's seemingly putting up points every game. And he's a firecracker on the ice. He's all over. He's constantly got the puck on his stick, and he's just creating plays on both ends of the ice. Even defensively, he's pretty good.
Right on. Okay, Tony, it's your team's fantasy draft. You've got the 3rd overall pick out of the lottery. Lafreniere goes number 1. Byfield goes number 2. And someone comes at you with a trade offer for the 3rd overall pick. They really want Lucas Raymond. They're going to offer you like the 10th and something else really juicy. Do you take that and trade down and hope to get Askarov?
If my team needs a goalie prospect, then I might take that because I assume I'd already have a couple high-end offensive guys. But that's a tough move. Trading back to 10 might not even get you Askarov, to be completely honest. I've talked to a couple people who have been like, oh yeah, like my plan is to try to get a pick in the 5 to 7 range and grab Askarov there after a couple of the elite guys are gone. So even at 10, I think I'd have to wait and try to get a pick up in the 5 to 7 range if I really want Askarov. But Lucas Raymond, it's hard to give up.
Let's say you're looking at the players who are picking, 1 through 9, and you're like, there's no chance these guys are taking a goalie.
Yeah. Then if I get that, then I might go with the trade depending on what that other juicy asset is. But Raymond's tough to give up.
Yeah, it's funny. This time last year, that was pretty much what I was thinking with Cole Caulfield. I was like, man, I'm going to really, really reach and take Cole Caulfield in with my pick, and it was a mid-round pick that I had. And I was like, some people might kind of question, but I'm telling you, I don't care how fucking small this guy is. He's going to score some goals, and he's going to be great, and I'm going to look really smart picking him. And he was long gone by the time by the time the season ended.
I want to say in our fantasy draft this year, I think he went 3rd or 4th. He went right after Hughes and Kako, and it was just I didn't have a shot at him. I was like, all right, well, I'll sit here with my 7th pick and get who I get. Yeah.
All right, so that was fun. So again, if anyone hasn't seen this article, it's on the Dobber Prospects 2020 NHL Fantasy Draft Ranking. It is in our NHL Draft Rankings and NHL, our NHL Draft Rankings tab. So you can find it there. It's got contributions from Tony, myself, Yoki, Cam, Steve Ellis from the Hockey News, Scott Wheeler from The Athletic, Russ Cohen from Hockey Prospect Radio, Ryan Wegman and Brock Otten from McKean's, Brock's OHL Prospect blog, and former Dobber Prospects writer Will Scouching. So it's good stuff. And we might even do a second one later in the season, right before the draft comes out. Because it's such a cool article and a lot changes between now and then. So again, Tony, what's your Twitter handle?
It's at the Tony Ferrari. Try to make it simple.
Right on. At DPR_show or Farling for me. And thanks so much for coming on the show, Tony. I really appreciate your insight and contributing to this article specifically.
No problem. Anytime, buddy.
Right on. Keep your stick on the ice. And that's a wrap for this episode Well, we got a couple episodes coming up, like rapid fire. Probably next week. I'll be doing interviews with a couple different people doing World Junior previews. So I'll have an episode for Russia, Finland, Sweden, Canada, USA. I've got some pretty cool guests lined up for each episode, and I'll bang those all out next week, rapid fire style. So long as everything pans out schedule wise with life and Christmas and all those fun things. But got to get them up before the World Junior starts because they're preview episodes. So World Juniors are amazing. Great opportunity to scout for your fantasy team, and this will help tell you who to look for in the World Juniors. So we'll talk to you then. Tony, take her easy, pal.
Sounds good. See you later.